Hello, and welcome to Day to Day, the series in which we talk to thought leaders in the data space. My name is Matt Wicks. I'm the co-CEO of the Virtual Forge, and today we're delighted to have with us Liz Ferguson, who is the Senior Director of Business Excellence at CALYX. She has more than 20 years' experience in the industry, and we are delighted to get and hear her thoughts. Let's start, Liz, by talking about CALYX, the company that you're currently working for. So in terms of the day-to-day work you're doing, obviously you've got all of this data that's coming into the organization. What's your role specifically in terms of working with that data? Are you analyzing? Are you presenting it? What's your actual role?
Well, I'm Senior Director for Business Excellence, which in Business Excellence is predominantly continuous improvement, so Six Sigma type project delivery. So we use data really within those projects to improve the processes and services that we provide. And I know sort of in terms of tools, the data is really important, but some of the main tools we use really are around being able to translate that data to the stakeholders. So whether that's process mapping, but with that data overlay, or using data to sort of like validate fishbone data, so sort of like the cause and effect, and using data to prove or disprove which of those causes are actually real root causes. And that just helps us direct the approach and sort of the solutions a lot more effectively. And the other context of the use of data really is around baselining the performance. And then obviously when you make improvements, validating the scale of those improvements through the data, but very importantly, then putting in place the use of data to control and manage the process going forward. And I think that's sometimes missed. You either have data which is sort of like shared, but not really focused on or reacted to, or you have projects which fix something and then stop looking at the data. And, you know, either way, you're not using data to its full benefit.
That's interesting. When you talk about kind of projects where you stop looking at the data, are you talking about things where you're constantly revisiting your analysis, or are you talking about things where the analysis is static, but the presentation of that continues down the line?
It's more the latter. So once the best use of the data and any improvements have been implemented, you'd want to keep that sort of data display fairly, or the way that you're using the data fairly sort of like static, so that but it does need to really tie to your deliverables. So measuring and reporting on the wrong things is going to be useless as well. But we do revisit analysis. It depends, it depends on the situation. When we have issues arise, then there will be a case of, well, how are we going to look into that? How do we get the data? And are there metrics that need to be added into that?
So the sort of stuff that you're looking at, the sort of data that you're looking at, and obviously the analysis and outcomes are quite complicated, I would imagine. And I know that you've got some strong views on the best ways of communicating this out. So could you talk me through a little bit your opinion, your views, your experience on communicating complicated data to stakeholders who are at a senior level and have to, what's the best way? What's the successful way to inform without overwhelming from your point of view?
Well, it's cutting to the chase. So, I think being able to articulate data in a way that it drives discussions and decisions is a USP. I'm working on a project at the moment. We've got a huge amount of data. I could produce a 200-slide pack, but anybody reading that would get lost. So the knack really is sort of doing the analysis, but then in playing it back to the stakeholder, really relaying what does it mean? What are the key things? And just sort of like pictures. I like to use pictorial approach. So the process map and sort of like, big call outs sort of where the major data issues are. And that helps people understand. Whereas you can just completely get into analysis paralysis by going down rabbit holes, and so I suppose it's really about focusing on the messaging and the conclusions rather than the data analysis itself.
It's interesting that you say that, for sure, because I know that quite often when you're dealing with data professionals, that their life or our life is so much about being in the detail. It's really hard to pull yourself up to that level, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've got a specialist department in CALYX as well for the whole statistical programming and the management of the different control groups, test groups. And actually, I've been really pleased to sort of find that they can also speak English as well as data. But it's great fun when you talk to them and you can get into statistical significance. And then when you come out of that, you just need to translate that into things that other stakeholders can understand.
Brilliant. Thank you. So let's step back a little bit, if we can, and talk about your career. So how did you get to where you are now? Tell us a little bit about your background and the places, because you've worked in an eclectic mix of very interesting places. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would please.
Well, I'm going to start with blaming my father. So okay. It's his fault that I mean he's really passionate about cars, and so he got me into flying as well, and because of that, I really wanted to get into the automotive business. So my first job was with Jaguar cars. That was a dream job, and also it related well to my degree in ergonomics. So how can you fit things to people instead of the other way around? So that was my first job for 13 years, starting off as an automotive engineer. But the more that I was getting into that, I suddenly became aware of warranty data and customer complaints. And I'm going, well, why wasn't I aware of that? These are on my components. And so I actually started driving sort of more of an approach of how can we share that data with the engineers so that the customer data is helping to better inform the engineering decisions. And then I remember one year it was like JD Power, which is published to the public, and that's a survey on the quality of cars. And the first time Jaguar had sold enough cars to actually be in that report, we were 31 out of 32 manufacturers. And it was like, oh my God, that's just not, what are we going to do? And so around that time, I proposed and set up a department called the Customer Data Analysis Department, using the data, directing the decisions, and understanding it's not just about the engineering, it's all about, the production, the manufacturing, the way the cars are shipped to the dealerships, but the whole process really. But it's all around that data, and really proud to say that we moved from 31st to 2nd in the space of 2 years. Yeah, with only Lexus above. Yeah, and it's all about being aware of the data and using it properly. And then from there, I was actually headhunted into financial services. Again, blaming my father, because he said, well, because I was saying it was not as interesting as engineering. And he said, well, you can afford to be bored for a couple of years at that kind of pay, which was an interesting concept. But you sort of moving from industry to industry, I think really widens your perspective. And that was where I came in contact with the constraints of regulators more. And in fact, I remember a number of discussions where I said, well, why don't we ask the financial ombudsman? It's like, we can't do that. That's like asking the police if you're breaking the law. And no, it's actually asking the police whether you would be breaking the law if you did something, and actually sort of that not seeing them as an enemy and using the data and having those kind of open discussions really can help to drive understanding. And the person that I knew from the ombudsman, I'm still very good friends with now, because we can work together. And from that, then I did then go into contracting. So having spent a few years in sort of more in the insurance industry, I then had the opportunity to go and work for quite a few different clients. So the police, that was hilarious. Working with command control organization was quite eye-opening. I've worked with Tata, Tetley, BBC, Nestle, and then ended up for 10 years with Shell UK, not just UK, Shell retail, so the petrol stations.
And with this kind of eclectic mix of different places, do you think it's important to be I mean, I'm guessing not, but do you think it's important to be a subject matter expert in order to be a data professional in those environments, or not? What's your view of that?
No, I think not. And if anything, I think that can be a constraint. I would say that you need really, in terms of expertise, if you've got expertise in improvement techniques, in use of data, then that can be applied anywhere. And actually not being an expert in that specific industry helps you see things in a different perspective. And also help you it almost enables you to ask the stupid questions. And I always say no question's stupid. But if you're within an industry, quite often you'll make assumptions. And coming in from the outside, you can start questioning those assumptions and helping them to think for themselves as well. So, I would say I've got a bias towards engineering, but that's because that's where I started. And I have heard quite a lot about the engineering mindset with data. But no, I don't think, I think provided you're confident in data and the other aspects of your job, it can often be a benefit not to be an expert in the specific field.
Okay, great. Interesting. And one of the other things that you often hear is yeah, well, we could do that, but the data is not good enough. And I know when we were speaking before, you were talking about your view on that. So I wonder if you'd share that with us, please.
Yeah, and I mean, data specialists, actually, if you look at what we do in terms of evaluating data quality with a gauge R&R, it's actually acceptable to have a certain level of data error. It's almost expected with a lot of measurement systems. So I think that focus on the data has to be absolutely accurate is a distraction. And I think the most important thing is that spend your time looking at the data and identifying actions, including how to improve the data, instead of spending your time arguing about whether the data is right or not. And, on the project that I'm on at the moment, the regulatory based data is absolutely accurate. System data is accurate, provided you know the time zone that the timestamps are being used for. But I think sort of any data is better than nothing. And it gives you a starting point to then help you develop the improvements to the data. So I always get very frustrated when people are sort of dismissing data or just spending too long going around in the same circles discussing it. Really, it doesn't need to be perfect. It can always be improved. And that should be a focus as well. But it shouldn't stop you from using what you have.
Yeah, I think that's a really refreshing perspective, because quite often, you spend months in conversation about the quality of the data, and you end up probably using the poor data anyway, because the practicalities of updating it are so complex. Okay, so finally, Liz, if I was setting out to be a data analyst today, and I came to you and say, please give me some advice, what would be your top tips to help me kind of get into the industry or be a good member of the industry?
Well, I'd say question everything. And, that includes, so you can improve your understanding of the data that you're dealing with. Don't take anything for granted, but also, start with what you have available and then work from there. The other thing is avoid paralysis, analysis paralysis. Focus on how to tell a relevant story with the data. It's the story that's important and that the decisions will be made on, rather than the actual data itself. I know it sounds a bit odd, but it's that sort of being able to translate and drive decisions. Don't feel you need to be an expert in your industry. Like I said, I think it's an advantage to not be an expert. And And one thing that I thoroughly enjoy is being able to tell people things they didn't know about their processes. And I've done that time and time again. And they can be involved in the processes for 20, 30 years. Somebody comes in a few days with the data and you go, oh, you do know you've got a bottleneck there. So I think that's one of those things that really helps build your credibility with data, when you can add to people's knowledge, and particularly things that they really weren't aware of, and understand what the data should be used for. Sort of key phrases that I always remember are: measures drive behaviors and data drives decisions. So, if the measurement and the data isn't being used to drive decisions or to drive the way people are doing their work, then it's no use anyway. So it's not just about what you do with the data, it's what the data is used for.
Brilliant. Liz, that's been an extremely fascinating insight. I've really enjoyed talking to you and your perspective on it, which is amazingly practical and very real world. So thank you very much for your time and taking the time to talk to us on Day to Day. Thank you.